I'm incredibly pleased to welcome Steve Tendon onto the Risk First Stars of Software podcast. Steve is one of those rare thinkers who sits at the intersection of deep theory and real-world organizational change. He's the creator of the Tameflow approach, an original systems thinking framework for achieving breakthrough performance in knowledge work in organizations, and he's the author of influential books on hyper-productive knowledge work and flow-based management. And through his work, he's helped leaders and teams dramatically improve organizational performance, agility, and business outcomes across industries. And as the managing director of Tameflow Consulting, Steve addresses executives, teams, and speaks around the world on how organizations can unlock performance and stronger collaboration and better deliver value in complex environments. And his work blends ideas from agile, the theory of constraints, and pattern-based organizational design. And that's exactly why he's the perfect guest to have on Risk First, because at its heart, Risk First is about navigating complexity, uncertainty, and trade-offs in the real world. And Steve's life's work is helping organizations do precisely that. Focus on what truly matters, remove constraints, and create the conditions where people and systems can perform at their best. But before the ideas and the frameworks, Steve is simply a thoughtful, generous, and deeply insightful human being. Steve, I'm genuinely delighted to have you here. Welcome to the Risk First podcast. How are you doing?
Well, hello, Rob. And as I usually do, and we'll have to explain it, I say, hello, friends of Furby. I am super happy to be here on your podcast and looking forward to your questions and conversation.
Right. Well, let's get into it then, Steve. So a little bit of background for our listeners, I guess. You run like this organization called Tameflow. You have like a sort of an approach to software development called Tameflow. And we kind of got in touch with each other because of the new Risk First software development book. And you invited me to join the Tameflow circle and to go and do a book reading with your community, which was fantastic and a great introduction. So do you want to tell us a bit more about Tameflow?
Well, of course. So you mentioned Tameflow for software development, but that is maybe not quite the current state. I am originally talking about like the previous millennium, like the Stone Age of this field. I was originally a software engineer, and that experience did shape a lot of my thoughts. So Tameflow was born out of software engineering management, but then it evolved and now focuses more on, I would say, organizational performance in the more generic collaborative knowledge work space. And of course, software engineering is still a primary focus area. So what is Tameflow? It's a unified collection that have this trait of conceptual integrity of, let's say, leadership principles, management paradigms, mental models, ways of thinking that aim at improving 4 dimensions, the 4 flows of Tameflow, the economic, operational, organizational, and human performance. In this, the theory of constraints also plays a very important role. So we always want to focus on the fewest things that create the greatest impact. And we want to do this without ever compromising sustainability, quality, or humanity.
That's a great pitch. So if I'm putting myself in the shoes of one of your clients, then what are the calling cards? What are the red flags that go up in my organization that make me think, oh, I better get Steve in to help us with Tameflow? What would be those issues that prompt that discussion?
Believe it or not, but usually it is when they are in the last stage of the burning platform and they are desperate and have tried all and everything under the sun and the moon. And as a last resort, they come to Tameflow. I would say that in general, now, if your organization is strained, is under heavy load, is challenged to keep the due dates, in short, it's hard to keep the promises it makes and expectations that the clients, the market has. And Tameflow can be an alternative way to address these issues, these problems, these risks. Rob, should I say that word, risk?
Well, I mean, I think that is essentially the point of the podcast, really, is that I'm going around the industry talking to different experts, such as yourself, to sort of uncover areas in which that statement, it's all about risk, is the kind of underpinning of risk first. And I think, obviously my background is this software engineering, and this is a conclusion I've come to in software engineering, but the industry of software itself is much wider than that. And so I'm sort of exploring all the other different sort of roles and jobs and angles of this, and looking at how it works in these different parts of the industry. So you are working at a completely different level with Tameflow. You're kind of looking at the unit of observation is really the company and the processes inside the company, right? Rather than a piece of software or a software project. Is that fair enough?
Well, yes. I mean, the scope is the organization, but the unit of observation, I would say, is more the human being, the individual, because I consider the reference model is like this social body where the success is determined by how effectively people, individuals, communicate, interact, collaborate, and especially make decisions, because that decision making is the key point. It's all about decision making. Then, of course, decisions have to be transformed into actions and implementations, and turned into working software and delivered to the clients. But it's how the organization arrives at making a decision. And of course, decisions is all about the trade-offs. It's all about assessing risks, whether you do this explicitly through some framework, maybe risk first, or just by gut feeling. But at the end, you're always thinking, what happens if I do this? What is the alternative? What is the cost associated, or the loss? So it is, as you say, it is all about risk management, risk assessment, even though people might not think about this in such clearly defined and explicit.
So can you maybe give me an example there? One of the things we'll get to later is I'm going to ask you for an example of where risks were not managed and things ended in complete chaos. But before we get to that, could you give me an example of where you've gone in and applied Tameflow and fixed something? So like taking a disastrous situation and fixing the problems in it. Can you give an example of that?
Well, since you are in the UK, I like the example of William Hill, which I think you're familiar with there.
Right.
As you know, it's an betting company, and it had an
One of many
online
vetting companies.
platform that in 2014 was supposed to be delivered by the kickoff of the FIFA World Cup. I think it was in Brazil that year. All of 2013, they were way behind. And they were doing Scrum and Kanban by the books, and I was called in and started applying my ideas with a team after an initial assessment of what they were doing across the board, together with other people that were working with me. Long story short, the performance of that team, and then consequently of the other teams, skyrocketed, and they managed to be ready for the kickoff. And what is really funny, I think, is that case also won the UK Agile Awards in 2014. I don't remember the exact category, but anyway, I find it amusing that Tameflow won an Agile Award while it is probably not recognized as an Agile method at all. So that was the funny part, but it is also a great testament that Tameflow brings about agility in surprising ways.
And that's great. And so I think before we talked about how about where Tameflow came from, and you were originally you started your career working at Borland, and you saw how Borland was getting a lot of the software process right and building some amazing products along the way. I remember using Turbo Pascal when I was at school and really enjoying it, and Delphi as well. I think a bit later on than that. So yeah, they were, I guess, in the 80s and the early 90s, they were real powerhouses of the software industry. And so I guess a lot of the Tameflow ideas came out of that. But what was the what was the moment where you thought, oh, hold on, rather than this just being my experience and the way I've learned about software, what made you decide, okay, I need to start turning this into a book and a product and that kind of thing?
Well, what shall we say? Gestation period was very, very long. When I left Borland was around 1995. My first experience with other organizations was of total disappointment because they were comparatively so slow and sluggish. Nothing happened, and that disturbed me a lot. And as I was progressing through my career, I tried to replicate the good things I had learned in Borland, but it was not like a systematic thing. It was more based on intuition. Later, I found myself dealing more and more with management, not only because of growing responsibilities in leading larger teams, but also and especially because I was involved in the due diligence of some software acquisitions. And there I had to first assess if an acquisition target was valuable enough for the expenditure or not. And then if the acquisition happened, assist in the material merger of the two organizations. And that was when I remembered what I had learned in Borland, in particular the patterns approach, and I started to put those ideas more into actual um, practice. But it was still not, oh, let's write a book. No, this was still years away from writing the book. It was more, let's, just jot down my ideas and notes on a notebook and keep it handy for the next problem or assignment. But anyway, that started me off in organizing my thoughts, and I was always quite successful on the ground. At a certain point, someone asked, "But how do you do this?" And I had no good reply. I didn't know what I was doing, more or less. It was just all intuition and experience. So I said, "Okay, I probably need to start writing about this." But it was still not the point where I decided to go for it. That happened still later when, as the evolution of this industry progressed, uh, I picked up the then new like Kanban method, which came about, I think, around 2002, 2003. And there, through David Anderson's original book, I discovered the theory of constraints, which was an epiphany because it allowed me to address and solve one of the key issues I was facing with my patterns, namely what I call the unity of purpose pattern. Why? Well, because the idea of a constraints allow coalesce and focus all attention on one point and get everyone behind it and support it. So it was really a catalyst for creating, for causing the unity of purpose rather than having it as an aspirational statement. So I was super excited with this idea of the theory of constraints. But then, as so happens, David Anderson said, no, you can't do it. It's I took a wrong turn there, and it's impossible to apply constraints management to knowledge work, to software engineering. And I said, hello, wait a moment. No, this was so wonderful, and you're breaking the toy right now. So I said, okay, I must really get into this. And that kicked off like my research in the direction of software engineering management and theory of constraints. I did a master's on the topic. And eventually after the master's, okay, no one has solved this. Now I have to write about it. And then I wrote the first book, the Hyperproductive Knowledge Work Performance book.
Yeah, I think writing a book is an incredibly useful way of getting your ideas into some kind of cohesive shape, because the fact that you have the pressure of an audience behind you makes you think about things in a much more methodical way. You know you can't take shortcuts, and you can't miss steps or skip out on some of the difficult thinking. You have to go through all the steps because you're really opening up your own psyche to analysis. Essentially, it's a part of you that you're laying bare and saying, does this make sense to everyone else? That's the kind of the amazing process about writing a book.
It has to start to make sense to yourself first, which is probably the first big step, because many times, at least I found myself writing stuff and then revisiting. So no, this doesn't work. That's not what I mean. And you have to, iterate and evolve the writing.
Absolutely. So I also, this is going back quite a long time now. I can't remember exactly when, but I remember reading one of Ellie Goldratt's books on the theory of constraints, and immediately thinking, oh, I can apply this in my work. This is great. I can actually use this. And I think these ideas show up all over software development of computer science. Like if you think about constraints like Amdahl's law, things like the amount of throughput you can get through a system, and how parallelizing affects the system. These are all kind of areas in which the theory of constraints has something to they're all kind of related to these very specific ideas in computer science. I think this. I don't know why anyone would say this isn't applicable. This is relevant all over the place.
Well, Amdahl's law and other now queuing theory, they are all based on math and physics. And Goldratt, as you mentioned, he was a physicist, so he approached these problems from the perspective and the mindset of a physicist. So it is totally applicable. What becomes challenging is that, unfortunately, now we have the humans in the system. It's not moving bits and bytes and inner loop optimization, and they create a bit of additional chaos. And I think that is what makes it more challenging to apply these ideas. So you end up with crutches that don't really resolve the problem, but sort of work around it. For instance, if you are using the canonical Kanban board with whip limits, well, that is a crutch. It actually hides the constraint, but it allows you to get closer to managing the system as if you were actually applying constraints management. You don't get the full scale of benefits and improvement potential that you would if you used full constraints management, but you're certain better off than if you did nothing else, or you did like in the old ways. So the idea has been around, and there have been many attempts at applying it, but I think most of them were just missing the target.
Yeah, I want to go back to you said that this all came about when you started you were doing some work on acquisition, and that was where you first started thinking about this as a system. So can you? I have absolutely no experience in this area of like trying to measure or value software acquisitions, but can you talk a bit about this and how the risks manifest themselves in that area?
Well, today I would do it in a totally different manner, but at that time I used the CMMI capability maturity model integrated, which is a good it's a good model that well tells you basically at what you should be looking at. Unfortunately, it often degrades in becoming like prescriptive to the detail. So that is the model that you can consider as a risk model. Now you have like huge checklists, and are you doing this? Then you're level 1. You're doing some more, you're level 2, and so on. And the general idea is that if you check all the boxes to the top, you have preempted a lot of risks. Now, that idea of assessing the validity of a software company in that manner is certainly valid, but today I would approach the problem from a completely different way, and that is by using more the ideas from like the organizational patterns thinking, the organizational network analysis, and try to figure out what are the social structures at work inside the company, because they are much more revealing of the actual human performance element than a long list of check boxes. So I think that's what I would do today if I were to get into the assessment of an acquisition target.
And do you think when companies are making acquisitions, I mean, there's obviously the due diligence that goes on, right? But it feels like a lot of the time they're looking at the balance sheet and they're saying, well, this is the value of the company based on its assets, and it's in this market and we want to be in that market. So a lot of it's based on trying to manage market risk and financial risks. Whereas I kind of feel like perhaps they kind of think, well, processes, procedures, operational risk, all that kind of stuff, we could probably figure that out when we own it, that kind of thing. Is Is that fair enough? Because I've been witness to a few acquisitions now where it's been mainly just driven by market, trying to get market share or having certain clients and things like this.
Well, there might be many drivers. So getting a larger slice of the market is one. Another is like diversifying, because in one of the subsequent major cases of assessment that I did was for a traditional publishing company that has been around for a century or more, that in the early 2000s discovered this thing, oh, there is a computer here. Things are getting digital, and therefore they decided to enter the software market. And they had zero competency in the area, but they knew it was strategic, so they started buying up software companies. So that's another motivation. And another could be that, well, the target has really cool technology. We need the technology, so we want to get the technology. And another classical one is that there you have really sharp, brilliant people. We need the brains, so we need
Yeah.
to get a hold of the people. So there are many motivations, but of course, since it is a financial transaction at the core from the outset, you have this financial assessment to begin with, and then the other elements become just like confirmation that it's a good choice, or a red flag that say, no, we discovered something bad. It's not really worth it.
Yeah, like the skeletons in the closet,
Right.
hiding at the back of the balance sheet, things that ongoing court cases that you don't want to deal with, or licensing problems, this kind of thing. Yeah, this is good. I think, there are when you're engaging in something as big as an acquisition of another company, there is so many things that could end up derailing you and tripping you up. And I think a risk framework is exactly what you need to try and work through for this kind of thing to at least,
It's not only the building up to the decision of acquiring, but if then the decision is positive, well, that's just the beginning of the fun, because then getting the organizations to work together is the real challenge, because often you will have completely different cultures. And the case I mentioned before was extreme, because there were tens of companies being acquired one after the other. So it was a huge mess at the end of the software capability was what I once told one of the top managers that said, I told them, it's like you woke up one morning and you wanted to get into sports, and you discovered this round thing that is called the ball. So you started buying a football team, a basketball team, a tennis player, a golf player, any sport with a ball. And then you say you have to play together like as a team. So obviously there will be some problems. They are all playing according to different rules. Um, so getting the different cultures to play the same game is really the key thing afterwards.
This is really true. And I think this is why a lot of acquisitions never really yield the value that the firms individually are worth more than the on their own rather than together. A lot of the hoped for synergies of like combining firms don't materialize, and you end up with just rifts and get breaks in the organizational chart where they've not been able to rationalize it. Working in banking, banks are always merging with other banks, and the process of a merger is it's kind of I mean, the projects usually go on for several years, but it's never really done. And you usually, when you're dealing with IT systems, there's usually vestigial bits of each bank left lying around for years after. And you're like, why is this called this? You're like, well, before we merged, we were called this. And then before that, they were called this. And so that system is from then. And yeah, you've got all this sort of archaeological debris, essentially, IT archaeology going on between all these different systems. It's quite crazy at times.
Indeed.
Yeah, so that's mergers and acquisitions. That's good. So what about on the software side then? You said earlier that you're more focused on helping managers and helping focus at the organizational level now. But do you still work in software development, or have you left that side of things behind?
Well, no, of course, no. The clients are often software companies or companies that are software intensive, like insurance and banking that you mentioned. So software is always there, and as you know, software has eaten the world. So all businesses have to deal with software nowadays, whether they want it or so. I have the advantage, if you wish, that I was deep into software, as I said, in the previous millennium, and in the Stone Age of the field. So I have some connection to the reality of software still, I hope.
Okay, right. And so how, yes, where do you think, so the Tameflow consultancy, where's that heading, do you think? How's the future how's the future look? Because I think some of the problems we've been talking about are not going to go away, like the problems of organizing people or building processes that scale, constraints. These are forever problems, right? But how do you see your business evolving in the future?
Well, no one has like the crystal ball, and my company has always been very small with a small footprint, and I really never went into the certification business. And some tell me I should have, and some tell me I still have to do it because that would make it more credible. In effect, now there is like this market brand risk, so to say, say the IBM effect. No one was fired for choosing IBM. And today we have a similar situation with, let's say, Safe and Scrum. There is the idea that if you use Safe, you lower your risk. It's CYA strategy, if you wish.
Yeah.
You won't get fired by using Safe. But Tameflow is really a niche thing. It's like a deep patterns approach, um, so it will be discarded on basis. Another thing is that not many people know about Tameflow, and this is also a consequence of the fact that I have not pursued a certification program. So there is like a lack of talent liquidity, and I'm working a lot on that and making Tameflow more accessible to a much broader base. On the management side, I introduced Tameflow saying it's like management paradigms and mental models and decision making. Well, the decision making models of Tameflow are quite unconventional and counterintuitive. So on the management side, you wouldn't have the capability to make these decisions, and managers would need to be trained as well. The fact that I'm using mental models and decision making at the center makes it very different. It's not like a prescriptive thing. Do these processes, follow these steps, have these ceremonies. There's almost nothing like that. It's more based on this conceptual integrity, the logic of economics. The um, the risk is more, how can you say, it's more a risk of cognitive overload in the sense that the decision maker is not prepared to understand these things and believe they don't have the time to learn the
Yeah, I think that's interesting, isn't it? And I feel like if you look at the arc, if you like, of Agile, when this first came out, well, for me, it sort of arrived in the sort of the early 2000s. And it was my peers and people like me, young software developers who were looking at this and thinking this makes a lot of sense to us. But if you went up the hierarchy, up the organizational chart, there were people who've been doing it the same way for many years and were not interested in that. But then over time, obviously, those people that start off at the bottom eventually end up further up in their careers. And so the idea of agile now is just part of the furniture. It's widely accepted as, maybe it doesn't always work, but at least the mindset is there. Sorry, the mind share is there and everybody knows about it. So I think with these things, you have to almost play the long game and expect that people are not going to pick up on these ideas for many years. Just going back to your certifications thing, though. So in my job at Finos over the last few years, I've been writing certifications. We've done two certifications, one for FTC3, which is like a desktop interoperability protocol. And the idea is that there are people who want to be consultants in FTC3, so they can go and take the certification and then they get the badge and they can display it on their CV or whatever. And this is kind of useful for them for getting work. And the other one was for open source developers working in finance. So the idea is that, if you're working in finance, you have to care very deeply about what your company cares about. So like the reputation, not leaking secrets, all of this kind of stuff. And so the way that historically that finance gets people to understand its values is that they'll be forced to do many training courses every year. Like when I was working in all the various banks I've worked in, it was like 5 or 6 training courses a quarter you'd have to get through just to prove that you still remembered what money laundering was, things like this. But yeah, I think there is a certain class of people who on LinkedIn are like almost like certification squirrels. And if you look at their like LinkedIn profiles, they've got all of the different things after the name. They're like, it's safe, Prince, blah, 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 Scrum, Kanban, all this kind of stuff. And they've got, I can't remember what the Scrum one is, MCP or something like that. And they've got all of these. So it's not just their name, they've got all of their different certifications following their name. And I think they are doing a great job of advertising these certifications to the world. So maybe, Steve, you and I should get into the certification business and write some certifications and see if we
Yeah, we
can
should take it
certification
seriously
squirrels helping us
somehow.
out.
No, but it's clear that certifications, notwithstanding whether they actually represent some real professional capability, which they should, they do have value because they qualify individuals which then are better placed on the job market. And conversely, for the HR side, it makes the selection much simpler. For once, I was talking with someone who said, "You're not a Scrum Master." And I said, "No, but I have a master's degree in software project management." "No, but we need a Scrum Master, a certified Scrum Master." Okay, so no, that's maybe more important. So clearly, when a certification becomes the discriminant in selecting candidates, well, it is a great filter. Either you have it or you don't. And I understand the HR people from that point of view. And that brings us to the next point. I hinted at it moments ago. Now, what is the value of this? And I think certifications, as they are today, they are just a dog and pony show. And you just have to have a good memory and then check the boxes, and you get it. So I would be more demanding and say you don't need a certification, but you need some kind of accreditation where you have to show with evidence and cases that you have actually done the work on the ground and achieved the results that you're supposed to achieve. So that is something I would favor rather than a certification.
That's a great idea, but how would that work? Would they come away with you on like a sort of a boot camp, and they have to prove that they've like you grill them and interview them on the
Well,
projects they've
I
done, or
still have to put this down properly, but if I just like off the top of my head, I would say, well, on the one side, in Tameflow, I use a lot of numbers of metrics.
Hmm,
So you can clearly now show me the number before and after the cure. Like in weight loss, I was 80, now I'm 50.
yeah.
So that's one thing I would do, and then I would also ask for actual case studies. So don't show me just the before and after image, but tell me the story. What's happened? What were the problems? How did you resolve the problems with the other tools that you have in Tampere? For instance, coming from the constraints management TOC world, we have great tools for conflict resolution. And of course, if you're trying to improve things, there will be people who don't like what you're doing, who will resist, who will feel exposed. And that's where conflict resolution capabilities are very valuable. So bring that into the case study. Show me how you hit all the nails on the head, so to say.
Interesting. This sounds like a fascinating idea. I think, yeah, I'd like to see that in action. All right. So this is the Risk First podcast, right? So we need to talk about disasters and things where risks have not been adequately managed. So give us some horror stories, Steve. What stands out in your mind? You don't need to share the names of companies. I know you already talked about some others, but you can keep them anonymous to save their.
Well, no, I can tell you a story from my first time at Borland, because even Borland had disasters.
Fair enough. Yeah.
No, I was part of the international team at the time. Software was not even thought of being used in different markets, and Borland was the very first company that actually addressed this. Uh, the first pass was, well, go and hand translate all the strings in a C file. And then you started to use like symbol tables, and you named the strings, but we had all sorts of problems because different languages have different rules of placement and composition of sentence structures. So this eventually evolved into what became the software translation kit, basically resource files. So all the translatable elements got extracted and became resources. And of course, some Borland products were pretty large. Particular, there was a database product called Paradox, and it was one of the most ambitious translation efforts um, that Borland undertook, because it wanted to launch a new version of the product in several languages in one go. So it was like
Right.
one launch date, and all languages had to be ready. So what was the disaster? It was that basically at cut time, when they cut the final discs, one language edition had a mix-up of resources. So the screens were garbled up with all sorts of languages, and the product was totally unusable. What this boiled down to, well, there was some problem in version management and separation of concerns.
And they shipped it like that? Is that what you're saying?
No, it was caught at the very last
Right.
moment. It
Okay.
was like 30 minutes away, and now final smoke test, and that didn't work.
So
This was
back in those days, everything was
all
shipped.
sign-offs. After all sign-offs, so it was ready to go, and it was caught at the last moment.
So
So
in
that's a
those
fun
days,
one.
everything was on CDs or floppy disks or something, right? So was this before or after they'd mastered all the
This
floppy?
was on floppy disk. No, CDs did not even exist at that time.
Okay.
So way back in time.
And had they produced all the floppy disks, or was that
No, this was
just
the
before that?
master
Right.
that was going to the printer, so to say.
Yeah. Yeah. The copier. Okay. All right. So I get. So there's a familiar theme in these stories where I'm collecting these disaster stories, and it seems to be around closing the loop. Where people people will do some work and just assume it's correct, and they forget to close the loop and test it at the end. It's just, I guess, in that case, it's lucky somebody actually decided to try and boot it up.
Well, closing the loops is really one of the key things, because in Tameflow, one of the four flows is the flow of information. And of course, no feedback loops are critical. And any company that can like tune up the spinning of the feedback loops will have an edge over competitors.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. This is something I harp on about quite a lot in Risk First as well. Good. So let's have. Do you want to tell us about what? So you've obviously been working in software quite a while, but for people starting out, just starting their careers now, what advice would you give? Is there other things that you've learned along the way that is still that are applicable now, or are we living in a completely different post AI moment and nothing counts for anything anymore? What do you think?
Well, let's continue the lineage of the Thomas Watson, the maker of IBM, who had that great slogan, think, use your brain, think. And then we had Steve Jobs, who enhanced that and said, no, think different. And I would say, think more different.
Think again. So yeah, so thinking, that's the thing that doesn't go out of fashion.
Yeah.
And have you got any online resources or books that you've read that you want to recommend that are really useful?
Well, in terms of reading, the book that probably has influenced me the most recently is Goldratt's The Goal, which
Right.
I highly recommend. It will not win any literature prizes. The writing is not a good quality of writing, but the storyline is important. And I think I've read it 7 times, and every time I have discovered some new twist, some new interpretation, some new thing. So that's one. And then all the other books of Goldratt, of course, are important. Now, from my perspective, also
Well, hold on
anything.
before you go on to the other books, because I've read that one as well, and I'm just going to give a bit of flavor for the people listening, right? So the interesting thing that he did in this book, which I've rarely seen in other sort of like it's kind of like management theory book, but it's actually written as a narrative between like a teacher and his students in class, I think, and then the teacher goes off to go and help out a company doing some manufacturing. Am I remembering this right, Steve? I've only read it once.
Yes, well, it was his advisor, or old university teacher, which had like the role that came up was that of a Yona, of a guide. And what's left the protagonist always bitterly frustrated was that the teacher asked him the questions so very Socratically. And when he was expecting the explanation of how to do the things, the teacher just had to rush off because he was so busy. So the protagonist, who was called Alex Rogo, was left there with these questions and a lot of the stories about how he grumbled over the questions and eventually figured out the answers by himself. And that is part of what constraints management is about. It's about asking the right questions. You hinted before at AI. Well, AI is great, but unless you ask the right questions, it will not help you. And there, the constraints management perspective, I think, is still a very useful one to have, even when we are interacting with these new entities. Well, from my perspective, I also, even though it's probably not used a lot today, but the root of Tameflow is in patterns, pattern languages, pattern theory, organizational design patterns. So all that way of thinking that originates from Christopher Alexander and Alexandrian patterns. That is very powerful stuff, but also very difficult, more difficult than the theory of constraints. So anyone who wants to get deep into this, I think, should look at that. And then, of course, last but not least, my wonderful community that you visited last, was it 2 weeks
Tell us
ago?
about that.
The Circle.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those undiscovered gems of the internet where you go on there and you're like, oh wow, this is a whole thing that's happening that I've never even heard about before. But yes, you've managed to collect together this really sort of great community of really knowledgeable people who I have to say, when I first turned up to the first meeting you organized about the book read through, it was it was a bit of a tense moment for me because I was suddenly confronted with this panel full of all these extremely well read and learned people that I had to try and explain myself to. And I was thinking, this
And you
is,
did very well.
thank you. But yeah, there were some great ideas and some clearly very accomplished thinkers in that circle group. Yeah, so the Tameflow circle, well worth checking out. And then you've also started cloning yourself as well. I think you're involved in some kind of genetic experimenting. Is that right?
Yes, no, I have this AI clone because, okay, so going back to what I said earlier, I want to make my ideas more accessible to a broader base. And what is the problem? I'll get to the cloning in a moment, but let me just give you the lead up here. The problem is that if you want to apply these ideas, you need to have like that system thinking perspective. As you said at the beginning, scope of action is the whole company, but it's only the CEO who has the real capability to act on the whole company. And you're not the CEO. So you're just someone in, as I tend to say, someone in the belly of the beast. So what about if the ideas of Tameflow could help you as an individual to gain like a quality of life improvement, substantial quality of life improvement professionally through constraints management patterns, conflict resolution, all these things that are part of Tameflow. And I think that is a proposition that appeals to a lot of people. I created a new training course, which I call the Career Booster. It's to help people to improve their career. And in order to promote this, I created this AI clone, which has my resemblance and my voice, and has he's pretty nasty because he thinks he's so superior to me and always talks me down. It's so difficult to deal with him and to do these episodes. He thinks that his silicon brain is much better than the wetware here that has to rest and take breaks. I have to deal with that.
So are you the CEO of the company, or is the clone the CEO then?
I have to be careful. I have to be careful because he's coming after me.
Yeah, and who am I talking to at the moment? Am I talking to the human Steve Tendon or the clone version, or will I never know?
Well, one or the other would always say, "Of course I am Steve." So you'll have to
Yeah,
figure that one
it's
out.
just I've just got to figure it out for
Yes,
myself.
game theory here.
Steve, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. This has been really good fun. Thanks for appearing on the Risk First podcast. Any last messages for the listeners, or that you want to get out? That maybe things coming up.
Well, first of all, it's been a great pleasure, and I would just hook on what I just said here at the end. Or if you want to explore this thing called Tameflow and have a personal benefit immediately, well, the career booster is where you want to look into.
Yeah, that's it. So think different and explore Tameflow.
Think more different.